Welcome to Moving Through and Beyond, a podcast dedicated to sharing inspired journeys of redefining life, vision, and purpose after immense hardship and grief. My goal with this podcast is to give you hope and to let my guest journeys inspire you to make the choice to keep looking up. I'm your host, Carey Conley. Hey, everybody, this is Carey Conley, host of the Moving Through and Beyond podcast, coming to you with the most stellar people on the planet, which is such a blessing that I get to bring people in here that have done some pretty big things in the world, but they also are very willing to be vulnerable and transparent about their life and their adversities and what they've been through, hopefully to bring some hope to all of you. So I'm very, very excited to introduce you to my guest today, Chris Widener. Chris and I have been friends for many, many years. I actually hired Chris to come and be a speaker at an event that I held. Literally, this must have been like 20 years ago now, Chris. I mean, it's a long time ago. He is named one of the top 50 speakers in the world, has shared the stages with some amazing people, is actually collaborator with Zig Ziglar, Jim Rohn, just to name a few. Just an amazing man. And what I love most about you, Chris, is that you always talk about influence and integrity. Those are the two things, the two words that I relate to. So thank you for being here. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Carey.
Yeah. What I love about the people I've had here like you, Chris, is that they've had a pretty successful life and they're pretty out there with it. We can all see what they've achieved, but they don't really know the backstory. Right. And because I've known you for so long, I know a little bit about your story, and I would love for you to just kind of maybe share, where you're from, what your upbringing looked like. Maybe we'll talk a little bit, of course, what you're doing now later, but just kind of give people some history.
Sure. I was born in 1966 into a pretty affluent family. In 1969, it was my dad, my mom, my three older brothers and sisters. My closest sister to me is 9 years older than me. She actually just passed away on New Year's Eve a couple of weeks ago.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. And my dad in 1969 made $90,000. That was his income. He was the fifth partner at an architecture firm called NBBJ. People can still go look that up. They're now one of the 20 largest architecture firms in the world, offices all over the world in every major city, maybe 7,500 architects. At the time, they had 150 architects, and he was the CFO. Interestingly enough, he did all of the income and profit and loss and all that kind of stuff for a 150-person architecture firm with an abacus and a slide rule. That's what they use. Us that grew up with computers and even, remember the old T1 Texas Instrument T1 things. We don't realize that the previous generation used abacuses and slide rules. And anyway, 1969, he made $90,000. 1970, long story short, he got cancer and died within 6 months. Now, he only had $30,000 worth of life insurance. And so most of that went to taxes and burial fees and, all that kind of stuff. So we were living in a house in Sandpoint Country Club overlooking the golf course, Sandpoint Country Club, Lake Washington, and the Cascade Mountains. That was our view. It was the biggest, most beautiful house in Sandpoint Country Club. And it most recently sold for $3.2 million. My mom had to sell that house that they had purchased in 1968 for $55,000 because she couldn't afford the $400 a month mortgage payment. And so that began a downward spiral. My mom went into real estate. She hadn't worked outside the home for quite some time. She went into real estate, selling houses. I was a latchkey kid before the term was invented. I carried my key around my neck on a shoestring and began to get into trouble. My mom flipped houses. Again, long before it was popular on HGTV to flip houses, she flipped houses. So we moved a lot. Thus, the 28 homes and 11 different schools I went to. And I don't know why she didn't flip houses in the same school district, which would have been kind of cool. But I was really a troubled kid, got into drugs early. My mom shipped me off to live with relatives twice, once in the 4th grade, once in the 9th grade to live with relatives. And got into drugs starting in the 6th grade, made my money growing up, betting the horses at Long Acres Horse Track, south of Seattle, which isn't even there anymore. Now they tore it down, built another one called Emerald Downs. So you're kind of getting a picture here, right? Drugs, alcohol, horse racing, all that kind of stuff. And got in trouble with at school, the last day of my 10th grade year, my principal, Mr. Davidson, called me into the office, and he sat me down, and he had a stack of papers this thick. And he said, "Do you know what these are?" And I said, "No, what?" And he said, "These are your written referrals to my office this year." And I said, "Oh, wow. How many is there?" And he said, 47 written referrals from teachers. And summer before my senior year of high school, I had been invited to go to Sunday school by a friend's mother. Now, she barged into the bedroom. We had spent the night there at her house Saturday night. She barges in the morning and says, "Get up, we're going to Sunday school." Now, you need to understand, I had no idea what Sunday school was. She might have said, "We're going to blah, blah, blah." It meant the same thing to me. So I went to this little tiny Lutheran church called Mount Si Lutheran Church in North Bend, Washington, at the corner of 8th and Ogle. And they had a youth minister there. And the youth minister, he was a good old boy from Helena, Montana. And he's still a pastor now in some little tiny town in Montana. And his name was Sam. And Sam had two things that I needed at that point in my life. Mm-hmm. First, size 11 cowboy boots. That's what he had. He was a good old boy, and he didn't take anything, even from me. And then the second thing he had the message that God loved me and had a purpose for my life. Mm. And that's exactly what I needed. He said, God made big things for you and has a plan for your life. And if you continue to live the way you're living, you're never going to fulfill it. And, even at the age of 17, I thought, well, okay, I want the most out of life. And I was headed nowhere fast. So I became a Christian summer before my senior year of high school. I ended up going to Bible college. I became a youth minister for 3 years in a little town called Mendham, New Jersey, one of the wealthiest towns in all of. I had kids in my youth group that made more off their trust funds than I made as my salary. And I had some great business leaders who took me under their wing because their kids were in my youth group. And one of them was, at the time, the senior vice president of marketing for Mars Candies. He eventually ended up becoming the president of CalCan, which was a wholly owned subsidiary, and then eventually the president and CEO of Mars Candies. And when I left there in 1991, I went to start a church. I was 25 years old, and I started my own church out back in my hometown of Seattle. And Mike really blessed me and believed in me and all these kinds of things. And to see some of those folks, the former Sealand CEO, former quarterback in the NFL, number 6 guy at Exxon, the number 2 guy at Prudential, all these very successful business people who expressed to me that they believed in me. And it really, I'd never had anybody believe in me before. And so one of the things that I teach people is lend somebody your belief, because there are people out there who don't believe in themselves, but if you'll believe in them, it helps them believe in themselves. Right. And that's what happened to me as a young man, right out of college, and really only 4 years away from that really crazy lifestyle that I grew up in. So ended up a pastor until 2002, at which point I started writing and speaking full time, at which point I ended up ghostwriting for John Maxwell. I ended up with a TV show with Zig Ziglar co-hosting, which they can still find on YouTube. People say, how long ago was that? And I say 40 pounds ago. And then, of course, my real big break was for 7 years. I spent 7 years working with Jim Rohn. Most people know Jim. He gave Tony Robbins his first job, and then I spent the last 7 years with him and wrote his last book called 12 Pillars. So that's sort of it in a nutshell.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just so interesting to me. I've heard your story many, many times, but there are little snippets that you just forget about, how you, I always forget that you became a pastor first before you went into business.
And that was great training for what I do now. In fact, it's funny to me because I'll hear speakers say, oh, I got hired by this group and they want me to come up with a new speech. And I'm like, yeah, try being a pastor where you're doing Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. You're coming up with 150 new speeches a year. So, and a lot of people in our industry call me the content king because I just came out with my 23rd book. I've ghostwritten a bunch of others, 100 audio programs. And people are like, how are you able to do so much content? And I really honestly trace it back to the way I learned to create new content as a pastor. Having to come up with 3 new significant pieces of content every week.
It's so interesting you're saying it this way, Chris, because I don't think a lot of people realize that when you're in a season of life, how it's just like a puzzle piece to the next thing, right? Yeah. Until you're in hindsight. Sometimes people are like in the middle of something challenging and they're thinking, okay, this is wrong. This is not good. This is, something's, I'm failing here. And I've learned that no matter how much the adversity is huge, there's something that it's leading to next.
Yeah, for
Don't
sure.
you
In
think?
fact, I
Yeah.
heard Mike Tyson got interviewed. Tucker Carlson interviewed Mike Tyson the other day. And you wouldn't think that Mike Tyson had much wisdom at all. But I'll tell you what, that guy has done a lot of self work.
Mhm.
And at one point, Tucker said to him, "You had no advantages growing up, did you?" And he said, "Oh, no, I had the best advantage." He said, "I had a great advantage." And he said, "What was your advantage?" And Mike Tyson said, "All of my disadvantages."
Yeah.
Isn't that just, it's not just brilliant, it's profound.
Yes.
That it's the disadvantage that becomes the advantage if you're
Mhm.
willing to address it. People will say to me, I have friends all over the world, and I still keep in touch with people I went to school with for 1 year in the third grade. And people will say, how can you walk into a room and make really great friends in 15 minutes? And I said, it's from going to 11 different schools,
Mhm.
because it was either sink or swim. I learned to make friends really quickly. I learned how to develop instant rapport. I learned how to, and I don't even know that I could sit down and say how to do it. Like I've never created a build instant rapport thing. I do have a program called How to Talk to Anybody, Anytime, Anywhere, but that disadvantage of moving all the time actually became my advantage. I just my wife and I moved to Chattanooga about a year and a half ago, and already have a great group of friends and made instant connections with people. And that stems from my disadvantages.
Right. It's interesting you're bringing that because I was having a conversation with a mutual friend of ours, Rita Davenport, the other night.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And Rita was talking about how, and she talks about this all the time, even with her level of success, she still wakes up every morning and looks around her beautiful house and just can't believe what much she's been blessed because she was raised in so much poverty.
She grew up
And
in Yazoo City, Mississippi, which is where Zig Ziglar was raised as well. And
yeah.
and that was poor as poor. And, I don't think she was in the Great Depression. She's not that old, but shortly thereafter, and certainly the mentality of the Great Depression.
Yeah, and she, like you, talks about the same thing about how she is so grateful for her poverty
Yeah.
because it allows her to every day still feel so blessed and so grateful for what she has. And like you, she's a huge philanthropist. She gives a lot away because she's just so grateful for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
how they bring that up. I am very excited to announce Envisioned Life. This is a monthly deep dive to unlock the personal power that you have around your money mindset, money management, time management, relationships, envisioning your perfect life, all the things you need for positive personal growth. I don't know about you, but I know that so many people are kind of tired of getting locked into long-term memberships that not all of the content applies or resonates with what you really want. So I chose to make this very simple, very flexible, and on a monthly basis so that you get to choose the deep dive courses that you want to take. Every week, we're going to have a live workshop that I will facilitate that will also be recorded if you happen to miss the live get together. And after that, you're going to be given some homework that you can do either on your own or in a group for some accountability. And then later in the week, I also will pop in to do a live Q&A session with you. In the live Q&A sessions, we're going to be reflecting on what we learned during the week, sharing the homework with each other, sharing accountability, and also talking about what we want to do moving forward next. To make this really, really simple, you just purchase one course at a month at a time, and it's only $222 to choose the course to where you want to start. You'll have access to it for the 4 weeks you were in it and 4 weeks after, so it's a full 8 weeks of having access to that course. I just really want to encourage you, if this is resonating with you and you're thinking this sounds intriguing and that you think you're going to get to it at some point, just don't hesitate. The biggest problem I see with a lot of people is they try to do things on their own and they try to push it off. This community is here for you because we need each other to be successful in our own personal journey. For more information, just go to careyconley.com/envisioned life and you will find all the information you need there. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it reminded me of another thing Mike Tyson said. He asked him, what compelled you to win? And he said, I wanted to win because I never wanted to go back. I never wanted to go back to that poverty. And then he said, and I don't mean financial poverty. I mean this poverty.
Mm.
And so I got to tell you, I was really, really impressed.
Other
I think
people
of Mike
looking at it
Tyson as
from
just a thug, right? But I think some time in the pokey and other things have caused him to really evaluate his life.
Yeah,
And very, very interesting. And of course, there's lots of examples of people who've learned those kinds of lessons from all the tragedies and the
right.
triumphs that they've experienced. But that's really the key, right? Is making sure that you learn from whatever you go through, learn from the tragedy and learn from the triumph.
Yeah. If somebody is listening to this right now, Chris, and they're going through something really, really challenging, what would you tell them would be the one biggest piece of advice to help them get through it?
Well, one of the quotes that is most often attributed to me that I said a long time ago is the difference between the successful and the unsuccessful is not the absence of obstacles, but the presence of perseverance.
Hmm.
Everybody experiences obstacles. We look at rich people, go, oh, wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't
Yeah.
it be nice to be that guy? Well, it might be nice to have his income or his house or his car, but are you willing to go through what that person went through to get
Mhm.
there? Because most people aren't. Most people, when they experience the obstacle, they quit. They don't persevere. And
Right.
so what I tell folks is just persevere. You
Yeah.
know, when I was a pastor, I had a season where I was just really low. And
Mm.
I can remember standing in the front pew waiting for the music to be done where I was going to go and preach. And I can remember just the little mental tricks that I did for myself to get myself through. I would say to myself, while I'm in there, struggling and feeling distant from God, and saying, one more sermon. You can give one more sermon,
Hmm.
one more week. You can get through one more week. This week will be done in 1 hour from now. Like literally pep talking myself because I was not in that place. And I think that that's one of the things that was happening was God was working in my heart, even in the low parts, right? Even though I'd walk through the valley of the shadow of death, therefore God is with me. And I would even say, a couple times I'd find myself going, pretend that you're an actor playing the role of a pastor. That's how I would get myself to get up, through that low time. And everybody has those low times. Billionaire businessmen have those low times. Pastors have those low times. Doctors, housewives, everybody has those low times. And
Yeah.
it's what we learn and how we get through those low times that really, I think, determine our character.
Hmm.
And all those things. The Bible says, consider it pure joy when you encounter trials of various kinds. And it talks about how, trials create perseverance. Perseverance creates character, and character fully developed creates hope. And there's a process to going through those hardships. And unfortunately, most people quit. Most people
Yeah.
give up. But there is hope on the other side. There is
Yeah.
character on the other side. There is insight on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is the thing is that we just have to choose like you're talking about, that this is just the moment in time, right? um, so after losing my husband to suicide over 8 years ago, my kids and I held on to the verse of 2 Corinthians 4:18, where this is just a moment in time, right? That
No.
really what we're focusing on is eternity. This is light and momentary troubles.
Yeah.
And I think that's really hard because we focus so much on the past and so much on the future and not on
Right.
just the present moment is just this present moment. And it's a
Yeah.
blip.
Yeah.
It's just a blip.
Well, the amazing thing is that to God there is no past and future, because
Mhm.
we think of everything in the context of time. Well,
Right,
God lives outside that dimension of time. Therefore, there is no time, which is
right,
why you hear things like the same yesterday, today, and forever. Why? Because it's all now. And
right,
so we need to live in the now and experience now. The past is already gone, and the future, we have no knowledge of what it's going to be. And so many people waste so much energy worrying about what's going to happen. And I always say worry is just the misuse of the imagination, because
yeah,
worry is usually conjuring up images that are negative.
right,
Oh, it's the 10th of the month, and people go, what's my bank account going to look like on the 30th? Am I going to have enough? They're conjuring up this image of fretting over their checkbook, or in their computer looking at their balance sheet. And you don't know what it's going to be like on the 30th. Frankly, you don't even know if you're going to be alive on the 30th. You could be walking out to the car and get hit by a bus. And yet we waste now by conjuring up things in our brains, and it changes our state, and now we're deflated, and it ruins today by
Right.
worrying about tomorrow.
So true. And this is, I think, the biggest lesson in life as humans is we have to really, really understand that thoughts become feelings, become things.
Yep.
And that our number one mission every day is to just really be so aware of our thoughts.
Yep. I always
So,
say beliefs create thoughts, thoughts create actions, actions produce results. So
right.
you want to change your results, change your actions. The way you change your actions, change your thoughts. The way you change your thoughts, you change your beliefs.
Yep. So true. So you have been on some really big stages, Chris, in front of thousands and thousands of people. Um, and I think you explained a little bit about how you transitioned to that. You started writing and people hired you for the writing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
started writing, and then it really took off. I had a pretty successful speaking career prior to meeting Jim Rohn, but that was really what sort of catapulted me. And then that got me my own TV show, and then that network wanted Zig to come on and do his show, but Zig was at the onset of his dementia, so his son Tom asked me if I'd be willing to co-host the show. And so, being positioned alongside Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar is a big deal.
yeah,
And
very,
it just gave me the opportunity to have my name known,
yeah,
and that in the network marketing world, which was where you and I met, people
right.
would call for Jim, but Jim couldn't speak because he had a deal with Herbalife, and
Okay.
Herbalife paid him $1 million a year, I think. And for that, he couldn't speak to any other network marketing companies. So they
Wow.
downsold him to me. Sometimes you get the upsell.
Yeah.
they got the downsell. And but it's nice because I picked up tons and tons of speeches, which got me to meet so many different people and travel the world. And then it was up to me to deliver and be good at my craft.
Right.
And I was fortunate enough to write a best-selling book called The Angel Inside in 2004. It was #2 on the Wall Street Journal, #7 on the New York Times, and
My
that helped me even
favorites.
more. And it's my favorite book. Although I got to tell you, my latest book is getting the similar reviews, and so I'm excited about. We're launching next week, and just
Yeah.
excited to see how that goes as well. But I'm not your typical self-help, 7 steps to a happy you kind of guy.
Hmm.
I'm more about meaning of life kinds of things, and probably stems from my career as a pastor, my pastoral background, to just make people think deeply. Probably comes from the fact that my dad died when I was 4, and I've always been very, very aware that life is short.
Hmm.
They asked Billy Graham once, "What's the most surprising thing about life?" And he didn't miss a beat. He said, "The brevity of it."
Yeah. Yep.
One day you're 20, next day you're on your deathbed, and you
Right.
just go, and there's no going back, no
Right.
going back.
Right. Yeah. I've loved your books, Chris. And you have what's the title and the content of this new one coming out?
So this one is actually the first book I ever wrote. I wrote it in 1995.
Okay.
And for 15 years, I carried it around on a floppy disk. And then in 2010, I put it on Google Drive, or, somewhere in the cloud. I think it was probably Google Drive. And it's based in Far Hills, New Jersey. It's a fiction book. It's based in Far
Okay.
Hills, New Jersey, which is sort of horse country. It's where very, very wealthy people live in Far Hills, and it's the story of a newspaper man who he has sold his newspapers, 50 some newspapers, for $1 billion. And the book opens with him finding out he has 1 year to live. 4 seasons. He has 4 seasons left, and it's really, even though it's set amongst wealth and privilege. It's really every person's life. We all know we're going to die. Cognitively, intellectually, we know we're going to die.
Right.
But we live as though we're never going to die. And so, I tweeted out a while back, life is precious because it ends. Life is an adventure because you never know when.
Mm.
And it's really true in that, when all of a sudden you're told you have 1 year left to live, now it's your last wedding anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
It's your last Thanksgiving. It's your last Christmas. It's the last graduation you'll ever go to. It's the last wedding you'll ever go to. It's the last grandchild you'll ever see born. And because it's the last and never to be experienced again, it becomes infinitely more rich. And what would happen if we had a 4 seasons mentality, that it's not morbid like, oh my God, what if this is not, it's not to drive fear, but it's to focus us in on the present and to
Right.
be completely and totally present and experiencing everything that we're experiencing as though it may be the last.
Yeah. I love that. And I'm so aware of, this, not promised tomorrow.
Yeah.
Have had too many surprises in my life to not
Right.
treat every day. But we do get caught up in the busyness, don't we, of the day-to-day stuff, not thinking about that. So I
Well,
love
and
that.
there is part of life that is mundane. Most of
Yeah,
life is mundane. In fact, in a way, I think we in Western culture are at a disadvantage because we have so much opportunity that we suffer from FOMO and we suffer from all that kind of stuff, fear of missing out. Whereas you go to a Chinese person who literally will spend 80 years of his or her life in a hut in a rural village, they
yeah,
have so much less disappointment than we do.
yeah,
They're not watching commercials on television going, "Oh, if I only had that
yeah,
car." You know, their expectations. And so living in Western culture, I think we have these expectations that unless you become fabulously wealthy or go into incredible debt, you feel like you are missing out and you
yeah,
feel disadvantaged and you feel like you're no good since you can't afford it. And you feel like the people who can have the Louis Vuitton bags and, drive the Ferraris, they must somehow be happier than me or more
yeah,
fulfilled than me or all those kinds of things. You strip away the opportunity and now there's no disappointment.
yeah. So if this was your last day, Chris, and you wanted to leave a legacy, what would be one thing that you would like to say?
I used to ask this question to people too. If you
Mhm.
had 2 minutes left to give one speech, what would it be? And I would say, create a legacy. And whatever you want your legacy to be, do it today. So if I were to say, what do you want your legacy to be? Well, I'd like to leave, an inheritance, financial inheritance, and I'd like to leave a legacy of love. And I'd like to, let's just take those two, for example. Well, if you want to leave a legacy of love, you need to love today.
Right.
If you want to leave a financial legacy, you need to save and invest today. If you want to leave a legacy of kindness, you need to speak words of kindness today
Mhm.
because your long-term accomplishments are basically your short-term tasks multiplied by time. So whatever you're doing in the short term, day by day, week by week, month by month, multiplied over time, they become your legacy. So figure out what you want to be remembered for and then start doing it.
Yeah.
Because whether you have 1 week left or 25 years left, whatever you're doing and however you're living becomes the way people remember you, and that's your legacy.
Yeah. I love that. Well, you've been a big influencer and mentor in my life, Chris, and I appreciate you so much. So, what's the best way that people can find your new book, find you?
Easy peasy. All they have to do is go to fourseasonsbook.com. And there I'm giving away 20 hours of personal development audio programs. So one on leadership, one on business mastery, one called Secrets of Life and Happiness, which is a 31-day. It's like 10 minutes every day, 31 days. And all of that is free with the purchase of the book. So they can
That.
go there. It tells everything about the book. It tells about all the Audible, audio programs they can get. They buy the book, wherever they come back, they put in whatever their receipt code was, and then we end up emailing them a link to be able to just download all that. So they're getting 20 hours of audio programs worth hundreds of dollars, all for the price of a Kindle book or just a book that they purchase at one of the websites we've got listed there.
Well, we'll make sure to put that link in the show notes. And thank you again, Chris, so much. You
Yeah,
are a
thank
dear
you.
friend to me, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, you're a great friend. And it was probably 2006, I think, that we met because I sort of got involved with the group that you were involved with in 2004, middle of 2004. And it was shortly after
Mhm.
that I started traveling around the country and speaking. So
Yeah,
I'd
that
put it
sounds
in
about
around that
right.
2006 range.
Yeah. Well, I've appreciated you so much.
Yeah,
I've
thanks. Me
appreciated
too. I
it.
appreciate you.
Thank you for being here. And thank you all for listening to this episode of Moving Through and Beyond. I'm your host, Carey Conley, here to remind you to keep looking up. If you found this episode inspiring or helpful, please share it with a friend or a family member. In order to be successful on this mission, I can't do it alone. Connect with me at www.careyconley.com, and don't forget to sign up for my weekly Do It On Purpose newsletter. Let's build this life-giving vision movement together to end this epidemic, save lives, and create purpose.